Question: have you ever had one of your favorite shows have its first few seasons be really good, but when the show came time to air its final season, the show went through seasonal rot and its final season was extremely lackluster? Well, this is the case for me with Danny Phantom's Season 3. Hello hookers and mansluts, and Paracogem here. We are here to talk about the final season of Danny Phantom, and just how, well, disappointing it was. Now, for those of you in the audience who don't know what Danny Phantom is, Danny Phantom was a cartoon on Nickelodeon created by Butch Hartman, creator of Fairly OddParents and 2 other shows. One that nobody cares about, except hardcore furries, and one that no one cares about. The show aired from 2004 to 2007, with a total of 3 seasons and 52 episodes. The show was about a 14-year-old gaining ghost powers from an accident in his parents' lab, and uses said powers to fight ghosts with his best friends, Tucker Foley, a huge tech nerd, and Sam Manson, a goth/hippie. Yeah, I don't get her character. The show was pretty popular with a lot of people, and is considered to be Butch Hartman's best show. While I have my issues with the show, like how overly awkward/forced some of its humor can be, and the very obnoxious music, it's still a really good show, and one of my favorite cartoons from the 2000s, and one of my favorite Nick cartoons. So if the show was well received, what happened? Well, that's where the 3rd season comes into play. Season 3 is where the show went downhill in terms of quality. The series was cancelled due to it becoming too expensive to keep producing. This was because Butch went over budget with Season 2, by changing to a more expensive animation style, hiring voice actors without Nick's permission, and asking Nick for $2 million to market the Ultimate Enemy with Burger King toys and a video game based on an episode from THQ. But after paying royalties to THQ and Burger King, Nick only made $50,000 instead of the $5 million they wanted. So Nick said they would cancel the series unless Butch could get merchandise deals, but couldn't due to companies turning him down because the Ultimate Enemy and the show itself were a financial failure. But because Nick still had a contract, they did agree to give Danny Phantom one more season, this time with 13 episodes instead of 20, but that's all it would be getting. Many fans, including yours truly, really despise this season. Hell, some people hate this season to the point they consider it non-canon. Even though a lot of people hate this season, I've never seen anybody make a video on this season before. Sure, there have been a video or 2 about Phantom Planet, and a few videos have mentioned the decline of the show during Season 3, but never a full-on video about Season 3 as a whole. So since nobody else seems to want to make a video about Season 3, I've decided...
Fine. I'll do it myself.
Now, this is a video I've been wanting to do for a very long time now, as I really hate Season 3, and in my opinion, I consider it to be the worst final season to a good cartoon. And the funny thing is, I used to actually like Season 3. Sure, I didn't like it as much as the first 2 seasons, but I do remember enjoying it. Now, what caused me to start hating Season 3? Well, I will get to that later in the video. Now, I feel I should mention this because I know someone's going to want me to bring this up. For some reason, Nick decided to air this season out of order. The first episode to air was the 6th episode, Urban Jungle. I'm assuming they did this to promote the DS game that came out around the same time. The rest of the season didn't air until July 2007. Even then, the episodes were still out of order, and I can't even recall if Nick even promoted the rest of Season 3. Because of this, I didn't even get to watch most of Season 3 outside of Urban Jungle and Phantom Planet until about 3 years later. Now, this is nothing new for Nick, as they have done it quite a few times before and after, like with Invader Zim, Teenage Robot, and Power Ranger Samurai. Yeah, I don't really have much to add, mainly because this doesn't affect the overall quality, especially 13 years later. Now with that out of the way, let's finally get into the real meat of things. One of my main issues with Season 3 is that it chooses to focus more on dumb shit rather than wrapping up stuff from the first 2 seasons, and that the tone is more lighthearted and comedic than usual. I'm not sure how to explain it, but the humor in Season 3 feels like it was ramped up to 14 and feels very off. The best way I could describe it is that it feels a bit more like the later seasons of Fairly OddParents. Also, there seems to be a slight more emphasis on being more gross than usual. I mean, there were some gross moments during the previous seasons, but it was few and far between. Again, I don't really know how to explain it, but the humor and tone just feels extremely off to me. As for the previous season's plotlines, Were you looking forward to learning what Vlad's deal with the Fright Night was? What Vlad wanted Pariah's ring and crown for? Did you want to see more of Valerie? Or more of Danielle? Or perhaps maybe see the return of Dan Phantom? Well, I hope you are prepared to die with those questions because those things either never get resolved or only get one major appearance. What we get instead are episodes about Danny getting temporary weather abilities and having mood swings, the trio going to summer camp, Danny becoming a rich asshole, the Box Ghost becoming a major threat, Penelope, Spectra, Ember, and Kitty decide to make all men in Amity Park disappear because they all of a sudden hate men. In addition to all this stuff, we also get introduced to 3 new overpowered ghosts, who are not that interesting, have zero motivation and goals, and are extremely one-note villains. Vortex is a weather ghost with breathing problems. Undergrowth is a plant ghost who looks like he belongs in Johnny Test. Nocturne is a dream ghost who looks like Alien X and Aku's love child. Okay, in all seriousness, Nocturne looks pretty dope. And did I mention he's voiced by Avatar Roku? Now, I don't mind filler episodes in a show, or when you add new things to your show, but this is supposed to be the final season. I feel resolving leftover plots from the first 2 seasons is more important than cramming in a bunch of pointless crap. Now, I can understand if Nick forced them to have more filler episodes, or if they weren't told from the beginning that this was their last season, but I couldn't find anything saying if this was the case or not. From what I can recall from an interview with Butch I read once, that I was unable to find again to make sure I was remembering this right, so if I'm wrong about this, I do apologize in advance. The interview gave me the impression that Butch chose to have more filler episodes, and I don't understand why. Nick told him from the start season 3 would be the last season. Like, if you're directly told you're only getting one more season from the beginning and nobody's telling you you're not allowed to wrap up previous plotlines, I feel it's best to just play it safe and wrap up whatever leftover plots you can and not create new things that would prevent you from wrapping up those plot lines. Another problem I have with season 3 is how the ghosts were changed during this season. What do I mean by this? Well, in the first 2 seasons, the ghosts were people or animals who were alive at one point, and a lot of them had very humanish/animalish looks to them. Some of them were given some sort of backstory, and even if we weren't, it was always pretty fun to theorize their backstory and how they died. In Season 3, this changed. The new ghosts introduced are given little to no backstory, no motivation, and don't look or feel like they were alive at any point. This is when the ghosts were changed to being just monsters from another dimension. This is something Butch insists was always the case. Yeah, I'm sorry, but the show has implied many times that the ghosts are people who are alive at one point.
How stupid do you think we are?
And I will prove it. In Mystery Meat, the lunch lady arises because Sam changed the lunch menu. In Splitting Image, Danny is given the locker of old Casper High student Sidney Poindexter, which is haunted by a spirit. In What You Want, Desiree is stated to have died from old age and a broken heart, and that her spirit roams free. In Bitter Reunion, the previous owner of Vlad's mansion, the Dairy King, is later shown freeing Danny from Vlad's trap. In Shades of Grey, Valerie's dad's boss discusses how he regrets getting rid of the guard dogs, and in the same episode, a ghost dog is searching for his old squeaky toy from when he was one of the guard dogs at Axion Labs. Also, said dog has the Axion Labs logo on his collar. In Public Enemies, a ghost is being chased by a cop ghost, and the ghost cop being chased says, "You'll never take me alive, copper," and the ghost cop says, "You're a ghost." In Maternal Instinct, Vlad sends ghost animals to attack Danny, but Danny gets them to turn on Vlad by saying Vlad has their pelts on his wall. And if you still don't believe me, Ember's backstory, according to a producer on one of Butch Hartman's old forums, is that she was an unpopular girl at school who was asked out on a date, but her date stood her up, which caused her to go home and cry herself to sleep, and then her house caught fire and she burned to death in her sleep. Butch did have an explanation for this. He has said that the reason certain ghosts that look like humans had a human backstory was because the ghosts want to be human. Which still makes no fucking sense. The scene where we learn Desiree's backstory, that scene where the animal ghosts turn on Vlad, and those 2 lines of dialogue at Public Enemies alone contradict that statement and prove that this is a bullshit retcon. This is a decision that has always annoyed me. I will never understand why they decided to do this, as this was something that really didn't need to be retconned. It's just too hard to accept, makes no sense, and it just feels pointless. Now, if they wanted the ghosts to be both just spirits and the souls of dead people, that I would have been okay with. as that would have been easier to believe and make a bit more sense. After all, the Ghost Zone is a pretty big place, so who's to say that some of the ghosts aren't just inhabitants? I mean, we've had characters like Pariah, Dark, and Clockwork, who, at least to me, have always felt like they were just inhabitants of the Ghost Zone. But they didn't do this. Now, if you're gonna retcon something this big, you need to have an actual reason for doing so, and it has to work. Don't be like Ben 10 Omniverse, where they retcon Kevin's dad out of existence and retcon the Asmosians for no reason. Speaking of changes, the characters during Season 3 hardly change or get any real development or growth. There are a few episodes that have a moral of the day, but those don't really count, as nobody really changes or grows from them. Instead of having development, they choose to have character regression. The biggest offenders to this is Danny and Vlad. Vlad is no longer the same crafty, chess-playing, Xanatos-like villain he was before. Instead, now he's just some generic villain who wants to take over the world, which is something he has never wanted to do. Sure, in his first appearance, he did tell Danny to join him and together they could rule, but that was more of a throwaway line that didn't really mean much. Vlad's goals were more for his own personal gain and not for world domination. This sudden personality change is also not consistent with how he was at the end of Season 2, where Vlad was more aggressive and deadly. Oh, and speaking of goals, Vlad doesn't seem to have one this season. They had a decent setup with him becoming mayor, but him becoming mayor serves no real purpose. It doesn't lead to anything. In fact, nothing you do with Vlad leads to anything this season, unlike the first two seasons where almost everything Vlad did was for something much bigger later on. Here they kinda just have Vlad dick around and have him be a part of episodes that don't really need him. For example, one episode will have him spying on Danny, Sam, and Tucker, and see them with something called the Info Map, and now he really wants it. Now what does Vlad want the map for? He wants it to find his destiny? Why would Vlad need to find his destiny? He already has a destiny. Did Vlad just forget about his deal with the Fright Knight, or any of his plans involving Pariah's crown and ring? Or Maddie? Also, this is one of the instances where Vlad shows his out-of-nowhere desire for wanting to take over the world, which, like I said earlier, Vlad never wanted to take over the world. Now, Danny, on the other hand, they will either have him learn something he should have already moved past, or have him make stupid decisions. In the Season 3 premiere, Danny decides to pull a bunch of pranks on Vlad, and vice versa, because I have no idea. Wouldn't you think Danny would be a lot more cautious and not try to fuck with Vlad, considering, what happened to Kindred Spirits? Or Vlad was a lot more aggressive than usual to the point where he tries to murder Danny for causing Vlad's Danny clone to die. Another episode will have him and his family become rich, which results in Danny ignoring his responsibilities and his friends. If Danny did something like this back in Season 1, then this might be a little more acceptable, as Danny was still growing. But this is something he's already moved past. In fact, he already did, back in Attack of the Killer Garage Sale. The only somewhat interesting development they gave Danny was his growing fame and popularity as Danny Phantom, but that's only for one episode. Instead, we need to focus on Danny and Sam becoming a couple, and by focus, I mean just shove the relationship up your ass as much as possible and only make unsubtle hints that they like each other over and over and over again. Now, Danny and Sam becoming a couple would have been fine, but there are some problems I have with it. Number 1, all they do is hint that the two love each other over and over again and nothing else. When you choose to focus on a relationship this much, you have to actually develop the two falling in love, and not just make annoying hints. There are some ways to go about this. You can have Danny and Sam date other people, and have them realize that the ones they are dating aren't the ones for them, and have them grow a closer attachment to each other. Or you can have an episode determining if Danny and Sam should just be friends or become a couple, and have them discuss why the two of them dating would or wouldn't be a good idea. Sort of like that scene in Justice League Season 2 between John and Hawkgirl. I mean, if they wanted to subtly build up this relationship, that's fine, but them showing that they like each other over and over again is not subtle, it's just fucking obnoxious, and makes me care even less if they get together or not. It also makes them getting together not very satisfying. Number 2, they showed back in Season 2 that Danny is still into Valerie. Valerie during this season gets shafted really hard. She only gets one major appearance this season, the second to last episode of the show, and while I really love this episode, there is one thing that bothers me about it. It's that they don't mention Danny's feelings for Valerie. In fact, Danny never really mentions his feelings for Valerie this season. The only time they mention Danny's feelings for Valerie is in the final episode. While I don't really ship things, nor do I care if two characters become a couple or not. In fact, the only couples I've ever really liked in animation is Jon Stewart and Hawkgirl and Jake Long and Rose. No, not that Rose. No. There we go. But I personally feel like Danny and Valerie would have made for a much better couple, as there was more proper development between the two. No constant slight hints that they like each other. They had the two actually talk about how they view and felt about the other. Plus we had their rivalry as their alter egos, which brought in another interesting layer. Now if they didn't want Danny and Valerie to get together, at least show Danny move on from her completely and not pretend like she never existed. Number 3. Sam does not make a good love interest for Danny. One of my rules for characters becoming a couple in animation is that I have to like both characters. Sadly, Danny x Sam fails really hard at this rule. This might come across as a bit biased, but I really do not like Sam, mainly because Sam is nothing but a hypocritical asshole who constantly forces her ideologies onto others. She'll change the school's lunch menu by having it become all vegan, instead of just, bringing in her own lunch. In another episode, she'll enter a beauty pageant to win to prove some point about how stupid beauty pageants are. She'll scold Danny for using his powers against Dash, even though it's usually in self-defense. But then in a few episodes earlier, she asks him to scare away customers for a car dealership. Because fuck the car dealership guy, I guess. It's not like they have bills to pay or anything. Sam, you do realize
You're supposed to be the good guy. You can't do this!
One of the only times Sam had any good character development was in Parental Bonding, where she acts mature and decides to apologize to Paulina for insulting her. But we hardly get to see anything like that again. I really feel Sam should have gotten her flaws ironed out, as like I said before, she never really grows from them, which is another reason I don't like her that much. Don't get me wrong, I don't think having character flaws is a bad thing, but since Sam is supposed to be one of the heroes, I think her helping save the town every episode will have some sort of effect on her and cause her to stop being such a selfish, hypocritical ass. Now, last but not least, it's time we discuss the piece of overcooked liver on a pile of piss and shit, the final episode of the show, Phantom Planet. I was originally going to make a separate video reviewing this episode, but I decided to just do it here, mainly because this does contribute to my overall problems with Season 3. Now, you would hope that the final episode would kinda make up for this shitstorm of a season, and end the series on a decent note, sorta like at NA where its final season wasn't very good, don't at me, but its final was great and made up for its final season. But no, just like the rest of Season 3, it's just more disappointing than my son. And my sister. So Vlad has decided to hire a trio of ghost hunters to take Danny's job and humiliate him. The new trio are able to take down ghosts that Danny usually has a hard time taking down, which makes them more popular and the town starts to ignore Danny. Danny then contemplates getting rid of his powers because he feels he is no longer needed and because the town is ignoring him. Then the Master Blasters come to arrest Danny's parents for ghost harboring. This is what gives Danny the push to get rid of his powers. And how to get rid of his powers? He does this by using the ghost portal, and not the ghost catcher. Now where do I even begin with this? The reason Danny giving up his powers doesn't work is because Danny would not give up, especially this easily. Plus one of his defining characteristics is to protect everyone around him, especially his loved ones. Not to mention, Danny has been through so much worse situations than this, and yet the town hating him again, being replaced by some ghost hunters, and his parents being arrested make him call it quits? Despite the fact the town hated him in the first season, and also the fact that his family were kidnapped or were about to be killed several times. It's just so out of character for Danny to do this. This is as stupid as that episode once a ranger from Power Rangers Operation Overdrive, where the Overdrive Rangers decided to quit because they lost their powers. Now what Danny should have done instead of giving up his powers is use those powers and show Vlad and Master's Blasters he's not gonna take this shit. But no, he just gives them up, even though Vlad is obviously up to something. We later get a scene of Sam chewing Danny out for giving up his powers, And I really hate this scene, and it further shows why Danny and Sam would not make a good couple. Now, for the most part, I completely agree with Sam in this scene, and her argument is completely justified, as Danny giving up his powers was a boneheaded and stupid decision. However, her argument falls apart when she says this.
But now you're just one of the crowd again.
So apparently Sam seemed to only like Danny because he had superpowers? So why were you friends with him in the first place when he didn't have powers if he couldn't stand people who are just a part of the crowd? I get that wasn't what they were going for in this scene, but they worded it so badly that it's kinda hard not to think that. Do you guys see why I don't feel Sam is a good love interest for Danny? Now we need to focus on a meteor heading towards Earth because it was set up at the beginning of the episode. Why does that sound so familiar? Now, if you thought Vlad couldn't get any worse, oh boy, then you are sadly mistaken. Vlad decides to reveal his identity to the world and says that he'll save the Earth, but only if the world makes him their ruler and gives him $500 billion. First, Vlad is already super rich. What would he need more money for? And second, Vlad never wanted to rule the fucking world, you stupid cunt! So Jack takes Vlad into space so Vlad can phase the asteroid through the Earth, but it turns out ghosts can't touch it as it nullifies their powers. Now why would Vlad do something this idiotic? Vlad is usually a lot more smarter than this. Vlad would have gotten a sample first and run some tests to make sure that it would have worked before he tried something like this. This is such an insult to Vlad's character and makes him look like a real shithead. So since Vlad is fucked, he tries to get Jack to help him, but Jack just leaves him to die in space because he would help a friend, but not him. This is probably the only scene we get that actually works, mainly due to it showing a trait of Jack's I really like. Despite the fact that Jack is a dumbass most of the time, he still loves and cares about the people around him. Like I said, Jack will protect and help his loved ones, but won't protect or help Vlad here. Besides the whole Vlad turning out to be a villain thing, to Jack, this is not Vlad. This is just someone that looks and sounds like Vlad. Vlad in Jack's eyes died 20 years ago. As much as I hate this episode, this scene is really great and also very powerful. This is exactly how I expected Jack to react to Vlad being a bad guy, and it does not disappoint on that front. Kinda sucks the rest of the episode couldn't be as amazing as this moment was. Danny gets the idea to make the Earth intangible, which I am pretty sure would not work because, you know, the asteroid sorts out ghost powers. Danny goes into the ghost zone to try and get the ghosts to help, but they refuse to even when Danny and his friend explain that the Earth and the ghost zone are linked because it's the flip side of the Earth and if one goes, the other goes with it. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. Back in Living Large, the guys in white buy Fenton Works and plan on nuking the ghost zone. Sam and Tucker see this and come to the conclusion that destroying the ghost zone will destroy the Earth, and vice versa, as they are both a flip side of each other or some shit. You may be asking yourselves, man, how'd they come to this conclusion?
There's a simple explanation.
Fuck off, Gosei. Yeah, this conclusion is kinda pulled out of their ass cause plot convenience. This becomes even more confusing because they also state that the ghost zone is a different dimension. I'm not really a sciencey person, but by that logic, the Earth being destroyed should not affect the ghost zone whatsoever, since the ghost zone will be considered its own separate entity. Okay, let's start wrapping this up, because I really want to go to bed, guys. Danny is then shot by Skulker and some ghost extras, and this is what gives Danny his powers back. Somehow. Danny gets the world to build a tower in the North Pole with giant tubes that will be placed around the Earth. The tower will turn the Earth intangible when the ghosts make the tower intangible. Danny and Sam kiss. Danny tries to convince the ghosts to help by reiterating the whole Earth and ghost zone being linked shit. The ghosts agree to help save the Earth. Danny's plan works even though it technically shouldn't. The Earth is saved. Danny reveals his identity to the whole world because all of a sudden he's fine with having no secret identity, which makes him erasing everyone's memory at the end of Reality Trip even more fucking pointless. The world applauds, including Valerie, because they wanted to kick us in the nuts some more. I'm sorry, but I did not wait 3 seasons for Valerie to just smile and clap. She should feel angry, conflicted, betrayed, or anything else that isn't smiling and clapping. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Valerie really got the shaft this season and deserved so much better. Hashtag justice for Valerie Gray. Now Tucker, who isn't even an adult yet, is now the mayor of Amity Park. The world puts up statues of Danny, we get a scene of Vlad getting comedically killed by the asteroid. Ugh. You know, I was gonna complain about that, but Vlad's already been shat on enough this season, so whatever, just put him out of his misery. Hashtag justice for Vlad Mask. Also, Danny and Sam are now officially a couple after being poorly developed and poorly built up. In case you couldn't tell, I really hate this episode. Just like the rest of Season 3, this episode tries to do too much in too little time. It feels like a bunch of separate episodes crammed into one. While I can appreciate that they wanted to actually make this feel like an ending, because I'll be fair and admit, it does feel like an ending. But this wasn't the way they should have gone about it. It was just so underwhelming and crammed. They should have just picked one thing to focus on and stick with it. What I feel they should have done was have this episode be the return of Dan Phantom. Have him break out and be immune to Clockwork's abilities, either due to the time amulet, or the fact that he exists outside of time. You can also tie this into Vlad's deal with the Fright Knight. Have them both team up with Dan to get Pariah's ring, and have Dan defeat Pariah Dark, have Dan double-cross Vlad and take the crown and ring for himself, and use the power to get revenge on Danny and try to replicate the destruction of his timeline. This way you can wrap up 3 big plot threads and not make it feel like a bunch of episodes in one. The funny thing is, apparently they intended for Dan to be the villain of the final episode, so why didn't they just do that instead? Well, there is a reason for it. Steve Marmel, the producer and writer of the first 2 seasons, left the show or was fired after season 2 wrapped up. According to rumor, Steve Marmel wanted to take the show in a much darker and deeper direction like the Ultimate Enemy was, but Butch Hartman and/or Nick was heavily against it. But this rumor might be true, as someone interviewed Marmel about a decade ago. While the interviewer didn't say why Steve was not involved with season 3, they did give an impression that there were creative differences between Butch and Steve, which suggests that the rumor might be true. Steve also has stated that he wanted to finish season 3, but something prevented him from doing so. Now, whether he was fired, or he just decided to leave on his own terms, or if executive meddling came into play, we will most likely never know the answer, as Steve has never gone into any more detail about his departure from the show. Steve also never revealed what his plans for season 3 were, mainly out of respect for Butch and the other people who worked on season 3. Though what is known is that Steve was going to wrap up many of the plot lines of the first 2 seasons, and Dan was supposed to return, most likely for the series finale. Learning about this is also what caused me to reevaluate my opinion on Season 3, as when I learned about this, I hated how cheated we were out of something better. A Danny Phantom revival. Should it ever happen? In my opinion, no. Why? Well, I really do not want Butch anywhere near it, and do not want him involved with it whatsoever, mainly because he's most likely not going to take any of the feedback from Season 3 and fix what people didn't like about Season 3, as Butch refuses to listen to criticism from people who aren't animators, and no, I am not kidding about that. Yes, I know Butch doesn't work for Nick anymore, but who's to say Nick wouldn't ask Butch to come back for a Danny Phantom revival? It could happen. Also, I kinda get some sort of feeling that Butch was most likely not the real reason Fairly Odd Parents and Danny Phantom were any good. The later seasons of Fairly Odd Parents, Tough Puppy, and especially Bunsen as a Beast give me this impression. If they do revive Danny Phantom, I want Steve Marmel and also the rest of the season 1 and 2 writers to be in charge of it, as I consider them the real reason the first 2 seasons of Danny Phantom were any good. Now keep in mind, I'm not trying to say Butch didn't do anything and deserves no credit, or that Steve was the only person to work on the show, or that Steve is the real creator. As yes, there are plenty of other talented individuals who worked on the show, Butch included. Plus, regardless of how you might feel about a creator of a product, calling someone who only wrote the show the creator is kind of wrong to do. All I'm really trying to say is Steve just deserves a bit more credit and recognition than what most people give him. But thankfully he does seem to be getting a bit more recognition lately. I'd like to believe this is due to all the controversial shit Butch has been doing over the past couple years, which I'm not going to get into as this video's long enough, plus there are plenty of videos that go into more depth about the controversy surrounding Butch if you want to know more. It's such a shame that Season 3 turned out the way it did. It had such great potential, as it had all the proper ingredients to become good, but instead uses those ingredients and mixes it with brand new ingredients that don't mix and taste awful together. Which is sad, as it could have turned out great, probably even better than the first 2 seasons. But this season sadly will only ever be remembered as one of the worst final seasons to a well-received cartoon in history. What a shame.